I know you don't want to be in the meeting you're in right now, and you don't want to be in the meeting you're in later. They don't have to suck so much. That's what we're going to talk today in Conversations ahead of our Introduced conference. Hey, I'm Chris Winiik. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Technically, the news organization with a community of technology professionals. This is the space for our Culture Builder Live conversations, where we're typically talking about building better companies. In the next couple of weeks, we're taking over Culture Builder Live ahead of our Introduced conference on May 12th, with a few conversations that are blending the two, the Culture Builder Live conversations and Introduced, which is similarly focused on building better companies. So we'll see you at our Introduced conference. But right now, we're going to talk about meetings. We're going to meet about meetings. And to have that thrilling conversation, I'm joined by Karin Reed. She's the CEO of Speaker Dynamics, and I swear we're going to have some fun. Karin, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Boy, I'm not even interested now, Chris, in our conversation, like meetings. Snore.
We're going to sell it. So sometimes the most important things we don't talk about because they either seem boring or otherwise. We want to talk about virtual meetings, which we're doing more of. But I think maybe we should start with the fact that everyone clowned on meetings even before we were talking virtual. So let's start with some general basics. Why do we think meetings are bad? Why are meetings a bad word?
Well, honestly, it's because people don't put a whole lot of effort into planning for them to make them productive and effective. And so they just think, oh, if we get all these people in the room together, that the magic will happen. And too often it does not. So we end up with, a variety of issues. First of all, people don't have an agenda, so they don't know why they're there. Or they get into the meeting and you've got one person who dominates the conversation and nobody else can, get any airtime at all. You have people who just use it as an opportunity to complain about things that they don't like, even if it's off topic. So it's a variety of reasons why people hate meetings. But what's really, really bad is that we have more meetings now than ever before. And oftentimes they're longer. So our days are filled with things that typically we don't like. We didn't like them before we went virtual. We don't like them now even more. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make them better, because honestly, it's the only way you're going to get business done.
Mm-hmm. That's a great setup. So you are the author of a new book, is my understanding. You've dove into how we've been shoved into hybrid and virtual environments. It goes without saying that we did have, both phone conversations, conference calls, we used to call them before times, and virtual conversations before the pandemic. Clearly, this has just accelerated its use. And so I think it's just becoming really important for us to return to basics. You hit on some classics. We all know if you're going to have a meeting, have a darn agenda, have a clear point. I think a really good starting point is the first words out of your mouth in every meeting should be, our goal for this meeting is to do this.
Yes.
That sentence alone gets you like 40% there or something, I think. So always say that sentence. The goal for this meeting is this. But let's talk a bit about what is like unique or different about that virtual, or worse still, the hybrid meeting. What's particularly tricky about them as we move to what do we do about it?
So if people adopt that sentence that you just talked about, Chris, where you said the goal of this meeting is to do what, is something that would make the heart sing of my co-author, Dr. Joe Allen, because he is one of the leading meeting scientists in the world. And we wrote 2 books together, Suddenly Virtual, which is all about virtual meetings, and Suddenly Hybrid, which came about because so many people were like, how do we do this? So there's been this major meeting disruption, actually 2 of them in the past 2 years. Prior to the pandemic, we met primarily face-to-face. Then we moved totally virtual for the majority of us in the knowledge worker world, because we had to. Those face-to-face interactions were off limits. And now we're transitioning into this odd hybrid place where you have this combination of face-to-face and virtual. So it's really a challenge, because we had been doing face-to-face meetings for so long. We knew how to do that. Then we were forced to figure out how to do virtual, and people kind of got the hang of it, and you kind of made it work, even if it was by force. Hybrid is like this whole different beast of trying to make all of these communication mediums work together smoothly. So I guess the thing I would emphasize is it's actually great that we have the technology to do this, because imagine if we didn't. Whenever
Right.
you couldn't meet face to face, it would have been back to that phone meeting, and it's a medium that is not nearly as rich if you can incorporate video as well. So we talk about some of the best practices on how to really leverage the technology to make sure that you can move things forward. But it starts with the basics, that the common sense that's not commonly practiced. Start your meeting on time, end your meeting on time, make sure you have an agenda, follow your agenda, stay on track. Those are the things that you should be doing, which most people haven't been doing forever. But you don't have the opportunity to make up for the missteps in a virtual meeting as easily as you could if you were in a face-to-face meeting. So you have to be more purposeful in that regard.
I perhaps over reference this line that I remember a boss of mine. I had a few general contracting and plumbing jobs early in my career, and I had a general contractor who always said, "Don't blame the hammer." And what he was implying is that we typically want to say the tool is the problem when in fact it's our use of the tool. And that was ringing in my head of the last couple of years with our routine criticism of Zoom fatigue or virtual conversations. So I'm like, well,
Absolutely.
no, it's not the tool's fault. It's no, you don't want to have Thanksgiving dinner over Zoom. Yes, okay,
Right.
we can all agree to that.
I
But
always talk about the operator
yeah,
error relative to these video communication platforms, because it's not that they're bad. It's just, for one thing, we're using them too much, right? And that gets back to the whole idea that you have this meeting explosion where these chunks of time are occupying space on our calendar that shouldn't necessarily be meetings. So much can be done asynchronously, which means that, for example, if you're sharing a report, do you really need to share that report in a live meeting, or can you record yourself,
mhm.
giving that report and sharing your screen, and have people have the opportunity to digest it on their own time? It gives them flexibility to fit it in at a time that makes more sense relative to their workflow.
You've hit on a couple already, so actually I'd love to spend some time with the tactics we can employ. The asynchronous strategies we have reported on, and I try to do this a little bit myself. The small record, the magic of doing a 2-minute recording of, hey, this is, you asked me this question, and sending it in an email doesn't be too long, rather than making it a meeting. Actually just
Right.
recorded it, use it when you want to. I've heard folks use voice memos if it's even more just like, I need to give you a quick thing on your own time. Maybe start with me. Do you have a working framework for, this is when the meeting is necessary? Yes, actually, we do need a meeting for this.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about how you decide this is a meeting.
There are two questions that Dr. Allen
Yeah.
suggests that you ask yourself before you send that calendar invite. You have to ask yourself, is there a purpose for this meeting? And that sounds kind of ridiculous, but oftentimes people will just put a meeting on the calendar that doesn't have a purpose. You alluded to that earlier, and that's something that should not happen, because everybody should be walking into the meeting knowing why they are there and what they need to accomplish during that time. So first of all, ask yourself, is there a purpose for this meeting? If yes, okay, proceed to the next question, which is, does it require collaboration? So
Hmm.
do you need to have multiple people in the room to get their input in order to move forward? And if that's the case, then yeah, you probably need to have a meeting. But what you don't need to have is people in that meeting room who are just there to be spectators. That is not something that's going to help you to accomplish your goal, because they just become flies on the wall that make it more unwieldy for you to have an effective meeting. So the sweet spot for the number of people that you want to have in that meeting is maybe 5 to 7. If you get beyond that, it gets difficult to have a genuine discussion that is collaborative and engaging for all.
What's your stance on the recurring meeting, either the staff member one-on-one or small group weekly check-in? Do you hate those? Do you see them? What's your thought on those?
Well, there's a lot of questions, built into that one question. So it depends. For one thing, if you're in a virtual setting, if you are in a fully remote workforce, those one-on-one meetings are really important because it helps you to create, those relationships and build those ties in kind of an intimate setting. That's one of the odd things that happened actually as a result of our fully virtual lives. People had this portal into the personal lives of their coworkers, and it changed the dynamic of how they engaged. You found out that Joe was, a big fan of Legos, and you are
Hmm.
too. And so suddenly you can have a conversation about that. I talked to some CEOs who said, the virtual onboarding experience actually helped them to know their new people better because
Mm,
they met their kids, they know their dogs' names, and so it changed how we think about our coworkers. They're full people as opposed to just their individual roles. So I'm a big proponent of those one-on-one meetings to be able to continue to foster the relationship. As far as like the weekly stand up, I think they have a purpose provided that it requires collaboration. If you're just doing, a round robin reporting on what happened, why does that need to be something where everybody gets into the room? If there's no expectation that there's going to be commentary afterwards, you don't need to have a meeting just where everybody goes down, okay, this is what happened in my world, this is what happened in my world. One of the interesting things that I learned from one of the other CEOs I was talking to is what he likes to do is have those weekly stand-ups actually be converted into, audio records. And
mm,
they have these audio clips that they upload to a specific site, and then he'll go and do his daily walk, listening to those updates. It's almost like his own personal podcast, which
mm,
gets him updated on what's going on in his business.
mm. Yeah, that is the evolution of the team weekly. Because we're a team of 20. We're not a particularly large organization. We try to employ many of these. I'm also a big believer in the one-on-one. The team meeting, though, I think that pushes is a good one to have, because we have some of those that maybe should be pushed further. Um, it I'm going to lose you here in a minute. So to kind of push toward what I think is important to grasp, the embedded point here is that virtual and hybrid are different than in person. They have different strengths and obstacles. I use and think about the idea that virtual is really good at being efficient, and in person is better at the inefficiency. It is the, oh, can I get you a cup of tea? Let's go walk to the tea. And that inefficiency is itself the point. In a virtual dynamic, it is theoretically just meant to be, let's get to the basics. Um, are there other differences between the in-person and the virtual that you would coach someone? If someone said, hey, I'm having a meeting, what do you advise? You would care about whether it's in person or virtual because it's different. What is different about those dynamics to deploy different tactics to make that meeting more effective? If
The
you
one thing
follow
that
that
you really have
question.
to think about in terms of the remote attendees is that they are conditioned to be passive observers in that meeting.
Mm,
We have been conditioned to engage with screens by not engaging. We watch them, we
mm,
watch TV, we watch movies, but now you want people to be active participants through a screen. And so that requires you to always be thinking about how to get them to do stuff. So if
mm,
you are doing a virtual meeting, or even if you're doing a hybrid meeting, you have remote attendees, think about how you can have tools of engagement inserted throughout the meeting. So that can be, let's do a poll. That can be stopping for chunks of Q&A. It can be, having them, put something in chat, about, how they feel about a certain thing. So it's constantly kind of probing people to stay involved, re-engaging them so they don't check out, because it's really easy to do that if you're a remote attendee. You have so many distractions in your space. So if you as the meeting leader can plan out those moments of engagement, you're going to get a lot more out of the meeting. If you are all in person, it kind of happens organically. You have to be more intentional if you are virtual or hybrid.
hmm I want to get maybe a favorite takeaway of yours from either of these recent books, but one last tactical point that you certainly made me um, think about. at the outset of this, we said, set a goal, what your purpose is. Only have the meeting if you have the purpose. You also pointed out, does it require collaboration is a key logic. We talked about other tools you can use, record smaller conversations or something you want to share if you don't need collaboration, if you just want to do the update thing. The meetings don't suck, the tool. How you use a meeting might suck. Those are some of the overarching themes that I get from our conversation here. So then close with me. Are there other, your favorite, do you have a favorite other like tactic or takeaway from your books recently that you want to make sure the world adapts to?
Well, I would say that it has to be a joint responsibility of the attendees as well as the meeting leader to ensure that that meeting is effective. The meeting leader needs to be proactive in facilitating the discussion. If you try to have some sort of free-for-all sharing of ideas in a virtual or hybrid setting, it's not going to work because the technology is limited in terms of its audio streams, and you'll end up having this kind of stunted, stilted conversation. So the meeting leader needs to be proactive, but it also means that the meeting attendees need to step up. They need to stay engaged. They need to put down their phones. They need to close that tab that they are working on where they're checking their other emails and be focused on the meeting at hand, because that's the only way you're going to get something out of the meeting. And just keep this in mind. Joe's research tells us that one bad meeting leads to 3 more meetings, and nobody wants that.
That's a chilling bit of research to close out on. Karin, thank you so much for this conversation on making better meetings virtually important.
Chris, thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, that was Karin Reed, CEO of Speaker Dynamics, helping us understand better virtual meetings. That's this week's Culture Builder Live takeover of our conversations ahead of the Introduced conference that we technically are hosting in Philadelphia on May 12th. You should be there. It's all part of Philly Tech Week presented by Comcast. PhillyTechWeek.com has full details. We'll drop a link to Karin Reed's work, and we'll do a full recap on Technically after our conference. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you soon. See ya.